Good morning, everyone. We're in Perek Chet. I apologize for starting a little bit late. There were some technical difficulties. So if you're just getting on now, don't worry, we haven't started yet. There is one handout that I have here in person. I also sent it to everyone. It's a fascinating map that was done. I found it on the internet. It is without attribution, but I'm sure if I kept on looking, I would find the attribution. And what it does in this map, and I'll also just pull it up real quickly for those who didn't have a chance to download anything. What it does is it provides a little bit more detail to the rebuilding of the wall. If you remember, when Nechemia was rebuilding the wall, around the wall, he wanted to make sure that there were the various families who were getting to be involved to rebuild their section of the wall. This was early on in Sefer Nechemia. We encountered this. And when this happened, they went all the way around, and it just was that was the description. And I'm just pulling it up right now. And this map attempts to give us an understanding of where they were and how this wall was, who was responsible for what. So it's on the screen right now. What I find very interesting about this map as well is also the fact that not only do we have the list of where everybody is, but when you look at it, you can also see a little bit of the outlines of the current walls. So if you look right above in the right-hand corner of the map, where it says Hatzarfim Rochlim, you'll see there's a little bit of a line going up. That's actually the existing wall. They took a satellite image to show you where the existing walls were. You can even see the Beit HaMikdash in relationship, for example, if you see the circle, that's a proposal of where part of the mosque is as well over there. All of these different pieces of just trying to understand it. The reason why this map, why I'm pulling it in today, is actually because of this one little section over here, and I'm highlighting it on the map. It's right here, section 7. 7, if you notice on the box on the left side, it says Shar Hamayim. That's the water gate. No puns intended or anything else. There was a gate through which water was delivered to the Beit HaMikdash area. It was outside the actual Beit HaMikdash. It's going to play a role, and the role it's going to play is it's going to be a meeting point where Ezra, who's going to reappear in our parak, where Ezra and Nechemia gather all of the people. And they're gathering them there, if you notice, and there is a question of why specifically there. One of the suggestions of Tzvi Heber from Yeshivat Birkat Moshe suggests that one of the reasons they're being gathered there is specifically not to gather them inside the Beit HaMikdash. Because, as we mentioned a number of times, the Kohanim were people who were not only in charge, but they were also people, many of them, who had intermarried. And part of what Ezra was doing was Ezra and Nechemia were trying to transfer the sense of leadership of the Jewish people away from an elite structure, the Kohanim, for example, were the elitists, into a more democratic kind of structure. We see this in some of the takanot, which we'll talk about next week and the week after, some of the takanot he did. I've mentioned it before as well in the issue of the change of the Hebrew script, going from the old Hebrew to the Assyrian Hebrew script that we use. It was a more popular script. The idea of Ezra being the one who instituted Torah reading on Shabbat afternoon, Mondays and Thursdays. They were among the 10 takanot of Ezra and Nechemia, and many other things that they did was trying to democratize access to Torah. If the ceremony took place within, as some do suggest, within the Ezrat Nashim, in the larger area of the Beit HaMikdash, what could have likely been is it would have been a ceremony that would have been centered once again on the Kohanim, the people who were the elite, and those elite who had intermarried as well with the Samaritans, with the people who were the indigenous cultures or the culture that had been brought in, the Samaritans themselves. So doing it outside also democratized that event. You didn't have to follow all of the protocols. If you remember one of the questions way back when that Yeravam had, when he split the country into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and part of the reason why he blocked people, and this happened again in Chizkiyahu's time, why they didn't want to have the people from the north go to the south to the Beit HaMikdash, was, for example, the only one who was allowed to sit in the Beit HaMikdash was the Melech. and was the Melech from Malchut Beit David. If the people from the north came to the Beit HaMikdash, not only would they be recognizing that the most sacred place is in the southern kingdom, but also the honor given to the king of the southern kingdom would have been at a different level than their own king could have had. So all of these things contributed to their creating their own places of worship in the north. They wanted to avoid the Beit HaMikdash. Here, in a very different way, what Ezra and Nechemia were trying to do was avoid the elitism, says Heber, of the Beit HaMikdash itself and go into the more democratic kind of approach. We are in the beginning of Perek Chet. I'm going to remove the map from the screen for those who are watching, and for those who have the map in front of them, you'll be able to see it's not very difficult to see what happened. And it starts out as follows: Ve'asfu kol ha'am ki ish echad, and all of the people gathered as a single corpus. So actually, Mitzudat David says it's not a single corpus, that they came together, that there was this extraordinary unity, but rather he says ki ish echad, quickly, as just like one person would show up, how fast they just all came up right away. Okay, El HaRechov Asher Lifnei Shar Hamayim, and they came out to the Rechov. Now, Rechov nowadays we use for the word street, but we still have that same variation. For example, the plaza in front of the kotel is the Rechavat HaKotel. Okay, from the word Rechav, the open area. Rechov is an open area, a highway or a large area where you can pass through. So here they came not into the street, but into the open area, which you would see on the map is identified as the Ophel. Okay, this was a large place outside, right in the center, between Ir David, the lower part of the map, and the Beit HaMikdash on the higher part of the map. It was a major meeting place. It is, and this is, if you're looking in your directions, it's eastward in that sense. It's between the two. Asher lifnei shar hamayim, vayomru le'Ezra sofer lavi et sefer Torah Moshe asher tzivah Hashem et Yisrael. And they told to Ezra. Now, Ezra hasn't appeared in Sefer Nechemia. Nechemia came 12, 13 years after Ezra had been there. Nechemia was, if you recall, more of a political leader than a religious leader. Ezra had taken on the role of a religious leader. And at some point, when Nechemia came, not at some point, from the beginning of the book of Nechemia, we really don't encounter the Ezra at all. Here, all of a sudden, Ezra appears, and Ezra seems to be taking the leading role. And it could very likely be Zev Yavitz in his history, in the third volume of Toldot Yisrael, that what had happened was Ezra had hit a certain impasse in his religious efforts to improve the religious standing of the Jewish people. He wasn't able to rebuild the walls as he had hoped. Nechemia was able to finish that off, and Ezra had somewhat faded into the back of the consciousness of the people. However, now that it is a place of safety, now that the walls are built, we need Ezra to reappear, suggests Yavitz, and we need him to reappear because his role is going to be very simple, important along the way. And what he has to do is he has to really take the reins of improving the religious, spiritual aspect of what's going on. As Yavitz himself writes, I'm just going to read from it quickly. Ezra echelet ma'aseh lechadesh bruchot pnei amo ulekadsho lemamlechet kohanim v'havdilo otam me'amo hatoavot asher misaviv ach yad hitkara asher hitkaru hakutim Yisrael v'hamokshim asher shatu lahem kavda alav lehinzar mispar shanim. What ended lehinzar mispar shanim? What happened was Ezra wanted to go ahead, and Ezra was trying to improve the state of the priestly class, to go ahead and to move them away from the intermarriage that they suffered from, to move them away from any kind of foreign influences they had. However, with the impact of the Samaritans, he wasn't able to do it fully. And so he sort of stepped aside for a number of years. okay, until he was able to start teaching again without any fear. Nechemia shows up from Persia. Sham Sam Ezra laharot achrei nazro yamim rabim ulam bayom ahu nireh rak bikfodo leman shavot hayad v'hadar ala chanukah. And what ends up happening is he steps aside until Nechemia finishes his piece. When Nechemia finishes this piece and we're dedicating these new walls of Yerushalayim, then Ezra reappears in all of his glory at that point, and ultimately what? Shav Ezra Sofer Lavodat Kodsho. And then on Yom Teruah, Rosh Hashanah, Ezra reappears. That's when the ceremony is taking place. Here it says again, Ezra has Sofer. Now notice, in each one, we're going to talk about Ezra a number of times. Ezra is going to appear 7 times in this section. 3 times he's going to be referred to as Ezra Sofer. 1 time he's going to be referred to as Ezra Kohen. 1 time he's just going to be, 2 times he's going to be called Ezra Plain. 1 time he's going to be called HaKohen HaSofer. Okay, and it could very likely be that by identifying him here up front as Ezra HaSofer, what Nechemia is trying to do is identify that Ezra's role is not as the Kohen. This is taking place outside the Beit HaMikdash, not as the Kohen, but as Ezra, the one who is responsible for the transmission of Torah, the one who's responsible for guarding the Torah itself. And that's the Ezra Sofer, Laviat Sefer Torat Moshe Asher Tziva Hashem et Israel, to bring the Sefer Torat Moshe, which Hashem commanded Israel. I'm not sure if I mentioned it in this year or another year. I know I mentioned it last week, a review that Rabbi Yitzi Blau, put in the latest edition of Tradition magazine. It's available online, a Tradition journal, regarding a book that was printed by one of the professors from JTS, Benjamin Sommer. What Benjamin Sommer wants to propose, he's troubled by the issue of modern biblical scholarship that rejects the divinity of the Torah. Okay, it says multiple authors, a continuation of the Weltanschauung des Judentum going back, a couple of hundred years already. And Benjamin Sommer, what he proposes is a new way of looking at the Masorah, basically saying that there were multiple authors to the Torah, but that was all part of the process of our Masorah. And so it keeps on going back and back that there was a Torah Moshe. It doesn't have necessarily the same level of Kedusha. It's not a Torah Elokim, but it's Torah Moshe. And it was Moshe was, and this meant that it was not a divine origin of nature. It was something of a Masorah. Yitzi Blau does a very good job in refuting those proposals that he makes, because those proposals for us not only are scandalous, they attack the very foundation of our belief that we received the Torah, that the Torah came from God. Here, when we talk about Torah Moshe, though, we're not talking about any other understanding than the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu gave to us. However, for scholars, it gives them a little bit of a wiggle room, as Benjamin Sommer just did in his latest book on this concept, a very different concept of Masorah. One of the premises that Yitzi Blau is saying is, he believes in Masorah, but his Masorah doesn't start with God. Okay, so there is the sense of Masorah. So he's trying to balance the modern scholarship that he believes in, not so modern anymore, okay, of biblical criticism, with a sense of religious fealty. Because if it's just purely multiple authors and it's not divine, you can do whatever you want. So that's the reform movement. If you're in the conservative movement, you have to try to figure out some way that you're able to do this kind of balancing. And the only reason I mention it is this word Torah Moshe plays a role in his understanding or misunderstanding of everything. Vayavi Ezra Kohen et Torah lifnei kahal. Now Ezra the Kohen now brings it. Do you see, this is the first time it shifts. Why is he called Ezra HaKohen this time? Last time Ezra Sofer, I can understand Ezra Sofer. This is his task, his major task. Ezra Kohen, I don't have a good answer for it. I'm open to any suggestions why the text would now refer to him as Ezra Kohen. Me'ish va'ad isha v'chol mevin lishmoa. And everyone had access. Ish va'ad isha v'chol mevin lishmoa. Well, if you have men and women, then what's left in the categories. Now we don't go with the new definitions. You have men, you women. Good. Okay, so you have the children. That's the Relbag. Okay, the Dat Mikra says it also includes the converts in that piece. Okay. Malbim, however, says in an interesting way, and Malbim says that what's really happening, he is first doing it he's first teaching Torah on a pshat level. That ultimately he's going to go ahead with the Torah Shabbat. He's going to go a step beyond and start with the Torah Shabbat Peh soon in just a moment. It's the first day. Now, interestingly, Midioraita, there's no Torah reading on Rosh Hashanah. Here's the first Torah reading that takes place on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. Vayikravo lifnei harachov asher lifnei shar hamayim, and they read it, and they read the Sefer Torah. Okay, and in fact, when they read the Sefer Torah, it says the phrase is Vayikravo. Vayikravo doesn't mean, it could have said Vayikra. Why is vo there important? Dat Mikra suggests that one of the things we want to teach here is he read selections. He read from it. It wasn't the entire Torah. You can't read. He's going to be reading the morning. So during the course of the morning, it's you can really try hard, but you're not going to knock off all of the Sefer Torah in 2-3 hours of reading. It's just not enough. He read selections as a result. So from the morning until midday, neged anashim v'anashim v'amivinim, opposite those, in front of those, the men, the women, those who were really understanding, and everyone was paying attention to it. I did see one commentary that's mentioned, that the modern comment that says, why do you only read for a half day? It's about all the attention span that people could have. Once the noontime comes, it's a little too hot to keep on staying out there. Okay, maybe, who knows? But he did. Okay, Vaya Amod, Ezra Sofer, Al Migdal Eitz Asher Asula Davar. And he's standing on this platform. He's standing on a tower that was constructed specifically for these. So why was it constructed specifically? Because that's where he was going to be reading. He's back to Ezra Sofer. Right? He's the teacher. Why is that first time? So that's why I really don't have a good answer why the middle one is Cohen, and I'm open to suggestions on that. But here the Dat Mikra says, by the way, it was an important logistical move to have this tower. You're trying to speak to hundreds and thousands of people. Well, if they want to hear you, it's better if you're in an elevated platform and they can see you and voices can be projected. People still couldn't hear him fully, and there were people who were helping to transmit things, and that's, as a result, something that's possible. Now, if you'll notice, there's going to be people standing with him, and the Ralbag suggests that these people standing with him was like a private minion he had available. The only problem with the Ralbag, because you want to read from the Torah, you should have a minion. The only problem with the Ralbag, it's more than just another 9 people, him and 9 people. So, okay, but there were other people there. Most likely, this was the equivalent of a dais that he had established. Vayamod etzlo, and so the people who were standing with him, okay, were Mititya, Veshema, V'anaya, V'uriya, V'chilkiya, V'maseya, Al Yamino, to his right side. In other words, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people on his right. Umismolo, and on his left, he had Pedaya, Umishael, Malkiya, V'chashum, V'chashbadana, Zechariah, Mishulam. And on the left side, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there were 13 people plus him. Yeah.
Could it be that this is sort of like Hakel and maybe these were coins?
Oh. Yeah, so it's what's real interesting here. Hakel, if you recall, is Sukkot's time, right? And there's a mitzvah d'oraita. So this is something different that's taking place. And he is not, Hakel is read by the Melech and not by, someone. Okay, so there's a number of different shifts here. Remember, Ezra's a Kohen. He's definitely not the Melech. But it is on a purpose, the purpose behind it, the goal behind it is similar. By having these public readings of Torah, it is definitely adding to that, the sanctity of Torah, connecting people with Torah. But I would suggest that where it's really coming from is because, remember, they want to democratize Torah. This is all Yavetz, Rabbi Mishkin taught us this many years ago. They want to democratize the access to Torah. And so you want to have people there. Now, up until the time, it's 100% clear that the Kohanim were the ones who were the teachers. This goes back to Sefer Devarim. The Kohanim were the ones who were appointed to be the teachers of the Jewish people. But Ezra is now doing it in a way where it's not an elitist type of education. We find this, by the way, very much throughout Jewish history, that there are times where elitist education is important, but not elitist access. Someone just told me recently of a situation. A person passed away. It was during Chol Hamoed, was the Levaya, and the person from Chicago, his mother passed away. The Levaya was in New Jersey, and they had to run, quickly. It was a real fast Levaya. It was before Shabbos. They made it in and out. The only problem is the rabbi from New Jersey, and I don't know who it is, and I don't want to know who it is, got lost going to the Levaya. And he didn't make it. And they were on a very tight time schedule. And so this person told me his kids went to Ida Crown. I was paying the shiva call. Person told me, thank God they had a good Jewish education, because the rabbi got on the phone and the rabbi explained to the sons, okay, this is how you do a Levaya. This is what you need to do. And they did the Levaya, just the family there at the cemetery. And they were able to go catch their plane and come back to Chicago. And what he said is, which came out, he says, one of the nice things about Judaism is you don't need rabbis. But the reality is, rabbis are not priests. We aren't an elitist group. Rabbis are people who are educated in certain areas of Jewish law, and so there's a certain expertise in it. But it doesn't mean that the rabbi is the only one who can do X, Y, or Z. Other people can do it if they know how to do it. Okay. Sometimes people try to do X, Y, and Z, and they think they know how to do it, and what ends up happening out of there is not a good thing. So it's good, if somebody really knows how to do it, do it. If you don't really know how to do it, then avoid it. But it's pretty much the same as driving a car. If you know how to drive a car, drive a car. If you don't know how to drive a car, don't get behind the wheel, please. It's anything with expertise. But if you look at other religions, the life cycle events, the annual events have to be only from a certain group. We do have an elitist class called Kohanim. Okay, but they aren't the only ones who can do a lot of things. Yeah. It is less so in the non-Orthodox world. It's changing. In the Orthodox world today, and again, it's all changing across the board. I heard, and I'm way afield, and I apologize, but I heard recently of a situation, someone was getting married, and there was a fellow who also went to Ida Crown, who was officiating at the wedding. He was not a rabbi, he was not a nothing. Someone gave him instructions of what he should be doing. And that one I got a little aggravated at, because weddings are much more significant, and you really need to know what you're doing, because you can really mess it up. Okay, you can mess it up in a big way. In the non-Orthodox world, I think part of it was there was for a longer period of time, there was this mystique around the rabbinic role. Okay, but that's 20th century, 21st century. We're going back now, well beyond that. We're going back to the 6th century, the 5th century BCE right now is what we're talking about. And what Ezra and Nechemia are trying to do are remove barriers that existed to Torah. There were going to be Kohanim. You need Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash. You need Leviim. So there are elite class. There are priestly classes. There are different people who can do different things. But when it comes to access to Torah, to learning, and to be able to understand the Masorah, that was one thing that Ezra fought against, that it should not be an elitist. Anyone who could be. Okay, we talk about, even if you remember Pirkei Avot, we talk about the Keter Shem Tov, right? We talk about all these different kinds of the different Tarim that exist. There are things that have to be for a Melech, things that have to be for a Kohen, things that have to be for a Levi. Torah is not limited to any one group, and that's part of what this ceremony is taking place. Now, Nechemia is there, but he's in the back. He's taking a back seat right now. He put Ezra up front. There are a number, by the way, this is parallels. It's something that also occurred in Sefer Ezra. There's a number of different explanations. I'm following the explanation that Yavitz and many others take, and that is that this was during Nechemia's time. It was after that period of time. What was referred to in Ezra was a different ceremony that took place. Vayiftach Ezra sofer le'nei kol ha'am ki me'al kol ha'am hayam. Okay, and at that point, what he did, Vayiftach Ezra Sefer, I'm sorry, not a Sefer, Vayiftach Ezra Sefer Le'nei Kol Ha'am. Everybody saw the Sefer Torah. Okay? He's above the people. He's standing higher up. Ukfitcho omdo chol ha'am. And when he opened it, everyone was standing. Now, amdo in this kind of case, this word amdu is a bit of a debate. Rashi actually says they weren't standing, but rather they were quiet. Kamo amdu lo od, which is in Sefer Eov. To stand could also be silence, la'amod, to stop. Okay, is another way to say it. The Ibn Ezra says no, they actually stood. Everyone stood in order that they would be able to be more attentive to what was taking place. Remember, Ezra's in a different reshut, so there's no obligation for everyone to stand with the Sefer Torah being opened. He's on a platform in a different, basically the equivalent of a different room. However, the Dat Mikra says, no, this is just, it was Kavod Torah. You start reading from the Torah. This is a massive event, a famous event. You better start standing. Yeah. It's a Sefer Torah scroll. It most likely did not have the kind of Atzei Chaim that we have nowadays. I don't know if it was a Sephardi Sefer Torah, what kind. It was a scroll, but definitely a scroll, parchment scroll. My assumption of this was that it didn't look like the Sefer Torah in terms of the handles that we have. That's something that develops along with time. But I don't know. What? He was able to open up. So it could be Sephardim, it could be like with Sephardim, it could have been a teak. I don't know how he did it. The difference, by the way, is remember there are two sides to it. And a Sefer Torah always has two sides. Okay, a Megillah has one side. That's just one piece of information. Vayivarach Ezra et Hashem Elokim Hagadol. And Ezra started out with a bracha. The Ralbag says this is the Birchot HaTorah. He made, it was the equivalent of getting an aliyah. Vayanu cholam amen, amen, b'moal yedehem. And everybody answered, amen, amen, b'moal yedehem. Moal, the question is, what is the shoresh? Is it, okay, that alal, which is what the Ibn Ezra suggests, that it was just like Se'u Yedechem Kodesh Uvarchu et Hashem from Sefer Tehillim, that they lifted up their hands. Rashi says that it was more like, they're reaching up to the heavens. It was a symbolic kind of piece in that case. All of them are doing that. Vayikdu vayishtachavu laHashem apayim artzam. And they did Kiddah and they did Hishtachaviyah with their face to the ground. There are actually, the Gemara Megillah teaches us there are three kinds of ways they would bow. Okay. There is Pishut Yadayim V'Raglayim, it was in the Beit HaMikdash, where literally they're spread out, hands forward, as one of my students said, just like Superman, but on the ground. Okay, hands forward. That's Pishut Yadayim V'Raglayim. Hishtachaviyah is with your knees, okay, where you bow down on your knees. Kiddah is actually an interesting kind of bowing, which we don't do. Kiddah is where a person literally bends over in half, supporting themselves on their thumbs until their face can touch the ground. I can't do it, okay? I'm sure there are some people who could do it, okay, but I can't do it. And by the way, there were dangers to doing it because of the physical exertion that was associated with. There's a very famous story with Levi Itla, that Levi, the famous Levi, became lame because of it, because of the strain. And the question is why this happened. Was it something Min HaShamayim? Was it something that did something wrong? But it's a very difficult kind of thing. Here it says that their faces were touching the ground. This is probably the middle kind of bowing, which you'll normally see Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur time, by the way. If you are here at Kins, by the way, Rabbi Reese has his Masorah is he does Pishnat Yadayim V'Raglayim. He literally is out there like Superman, okay, on when he bows down Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Yeshua uvani v'sheravya, and when it came to the Yamin Akur Shabtai Hodiyam Asayat Klita Israel Zavat Hanan Playa v'Haleviim Mevinim et Ha'am LaTorah v'Ha'am Alomdam. And what was happening now is, well, you got this massive assembly. And all of the people, they have to somehow be able to hear what's going on. So Mevinim, what these Leviim were doing, these Leviim were actually like the loudspeakers. According to Rashi, they were metargimim. They were translating, explaining the Torah to all of the rest of the people, okay? According to the Dat Mikra, what they were doing, lahavin, is actually to understand deeper comprehension is lahavin, lavin davar mitoch davar, to understand something from something else. And this is already la Torah, says the Dat Mikra. This is already the transmission of the Torah Shebal Peh. And the people did not move. They were al umdam. Vayikru b'sefer Torah Elokim meforash. And they read from the Sefer of Torah Elokim, Miforash. The Gemara Megillah and Daf Gimel explains that when it says Vayikru b'Sefer Torah Elokim, that's plain old-fashioned Mikra. That's the Chumash. Miforash, that means they already were employing the use of Targum, of translations which include interpretation, Visom Seichel, and they place with it an understanding that already are the psukim, understanding where the psukim are. Vayavinu b'mikra, and this is the pisuk ta'amim, and others say this is the Mesoret, that they began to really have, as I mentioned before, the Vayavinu b'mikra might be the Torah Shebal Peh. So when they're reading, this is not just simple reading that you can doze off in. This has a reading which has explanation, which has learning that's associated with all of this. What they're doing, okay, they're doing it, and the Leviim are stepping up to the plate, because ultimately the Leviim are going to take this role. Remember, when we were talking about Leviim, they were part of a priestly caste, but a lower level on that. Vayomer Nechemia. Oh, here's Nechemia. Who hitarshata? Nechemia is hitarshata. Now we are employing Nechemia's royal name, his Persian name. Why? Because this ceremony has power to it as well. The Ezra Kohen HaSofer, and the power of Ezra Kohen HaSofer. In other words, if I look at this pasuk and I say, why is Ezra identified as Ezra Kohen HaSofer? It's because Ezra is given all of his official titles, and it's because Nechemia was given all of his official titles. It's I can only speak for myself on this. I've only use all my titles when it's something more official. I almost never write a PhD after my name. If it's something official that I need to do, okay, when it's a diploma, if it's a legal document, sometimes I will have that as well. Other times I'll have different titles. Depending on the circumstance, you have titles. Sometimes I put on my title, for example, when I write a letter of we call them a Jewish letter of a person's to the chief rabbinate, that I attest to the person being Jewish without any questions. I put my title not only rabbi, but I also put my title former president of the Rabbinical Council of America. Okay, because just in case I had a situation where Yaakov Ariel, the only time I met him was right after I had written actually a letter attesting to someone's Jewishness. I met him at a lunch. We were sitting next to each other, and he said, your name just came up. He said, why? He told me he got the letter. He didn't know who I was. And luckily, a friend of mine walked into his office at the same time. Do you know this guy? And he told me who he was. So you should always write at the bottom your title. So here we're coming into this massive ceremony, okay? This important ceremony. This is referred to as the Amanah, that moment of emunah, the moment really where the Jewish people are going to the next step. We want the full titles of Nechemia. We're taking the full title of Ezra Kohen HaSofer. This is a sacred day that's taking place. This is the day Rosh Hashanah, as we've said. Okay. Interestingly, again, this is a day, Zevi Abbott says, this is the day where we clearly implied that Yom Teruah is Rosh Hashanah. Al tit ablu v'al tivku. Interesting, he says today is a day where you're not supposed to be mourning, you're not supposed to be crying, because everyone is getting hysterical. They're hearing the Torah. They haven't heard it in this way. They're beginning to be afraid. Okay, Rashi says they're crying because they didn't keep the Torah the way they should have. Okay, and when they're going ahead and they, according to the Talmud, they're reading the laning of Rosh Hashanah and they realize, oh my God, this is Yom Hadin. They're scared. Okay, and in fact, according to the Dat Mikra, and this is based on Sanchiko, the custom used to be to fast on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Hadin, right? This is there's drushes all over the world every day, every time on Rosh Hashanah. If it's Yom Hadin, why are we so happy? Okay, this should be a day we should be tzittering, okay, more so than Yom Kippur. So that used to be a custom, according to Reb Sajid. And he says, don't do that. I want you to go out, I want you to go ahead, I want you to eat, I want you to drink, and I want you to do Shalach Manos. Now, Shalach Manos is not, Mishloach Manot is not the Mishloach Manot of Purim, but this is a Mishloach Manot. This is the way we celebrate by sharing with others. And so it isn't just here. We found the same thing in Shmuel Bet and Perek Vav, Pasuk Yutet. It's something where we create community. Ki Kadosh Hayom Ladunenu. Today is a sacred day for our Master, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Va'al te'atzevu, ki chedvat Hashem himuzchem. And don't be sad, because the joy of God is your strength. In other words, if you can see, if you have faith in God, then you can go ahead and be grateful, you can be happy. And the Leviim were going around and saying to all the people, shh, stop it. And they were reinforcing the message of Nechemia. And all of the people went out, they went to eat, they went to drink, they went to send out packages to each other to make simcha gdola ki evinu b'dvarim asher hudiu lahem, because they understood. I was speaking to somebody, this is that time of year, one of the Rosh Hashivas of YU, and all of a sudden I'm blanking on his name. I apologize. Rosh Hashiva, one of the teachers in the JSS program, in the program where the Balei Tshuva comes, and he says one of the things he teaches people, these young Balei Tshuva, he says, tell me the difference between Halloween and Purim. We're a day away from Halloween. He said, both of them you get dressed up, both of them you party. He says the difference is, if you want to see the uniqueness of the Jewish people, on Halloween, you get candy by threatening people. On Purim, you get candy to give away to others. And people trying to involve you. That's the uniqueness of what we are as Jews. It's an interesting piece. Uvayom hasheni, and on the second day. Now, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, says Rashi, okay? Even in those days, they would go ahead, in the time of Ezra, they would make an Ibur Shana. Elul was always an extra day, and they would do 2 days of Yantif, of Rosh Hashanah. This is based also, the Gemara in Beitza talks about this as well, in Daf Vav Amud Aleph. They come together. Nesfu Roshei Havot l'chol ha'am ha'kohanim v'alevim el Ezra Sofer lahaskil et divrei Torah. And they all come because now's the time they really have to learn what's happening. But what do they talk about? Vayimtzeu katuv b'Torah. They found written in the Torah asher tzivah Hashem biyad Moshe asher yashvu b'nei Yisrael b'Sukkot b'chag b'chodesh Hashvi. And they read about Sukkos. And so then when they heard this, they go ahead and make these announcements all over Yerushalayim, and all over the cities in Yerushalayim, saying, go out to the mountains, go ahead and bring trees, vale hadas, vale tamarim, vale etzavot, from all these different kinds of trees. 2 of them, by the way, if you notice right away, hadas and etzavot. Okay, we're already talking are 2 of the 4 species. Lasot sukkot kakatuv, to go ahead and make a sukkot as it's written in the Torah. ויצאו העם ויביאו ויעשו להם סוכות איש על גגו בחצרותיהם וחצרות בית אלוקים, and they built sukkot, and they built sukkot on their rooftops, they built them in their courtyards, and they built them in the courtyards of the Beit HaMikdash, Rechov Shar HaMayim, and they built it in the same place where they gathered, or Rechov Shar Ephraim, and also in the Shar Ephraim. ויעשו כל הקהל השבים מן השבי סוכות וישבו בסוכות כי לא עשו מימי יהושע בן נון came Bnei Israel, and they made Sukkot. They hadn't done like this since the times of Yehoshua ad hayom hahu, until that day. Now, from the time of Yehoshua until that day, okay, we're talking about 1,000 years. Okay, not 1,000 years. I apologize. We're talking about we are now in the 5th century. Yetziat Mitzrayim was the 15th. Was in the 15th century, yeah, almost 1,000 years. So as a result of it, how could this possibly be? You're saying the time of David HaMelech, they didn't celebrate Sukkot? How is it at all possible? So there's a number of different suggestions. The Gemara and Erchin asked this question. What, in the time of David HaMelech, there was no Sukkot? It could be that it wasn't Kilo Asumi Mei Yoshua Binun Kain B'nai Israel. The people, the last time there was such a joy around Sukkot was the time in Sukkot. Everyone had the holiday of Sukkot, but this was such a transformational moment. It was like the transformational moment when they first came to Eretz Israel and celebrated Sukkot. The Malbim suggests that the issue was a different issue. They never did a Sukkot like this because you can't build a sukkah. It's the Shulchan Aruch teaches in Reshut HaRabim, in public property. It has to be built on private property. Yerushalayim was always considered public property. The city of Yerushalayim is considered public property. It didn't belong to any single shevet. And as a result, they didn't build Sukkot until Ezra came around to build Sukkot in Yerushalayim. This was one of his takanot. The other piece is, and this Zev says, another possibility that it wasn't something since the time of Yehoshua, there were always people who didn't do the right thing. This was the first time since the time of Yehoshua where it was everybody without exception doing it. Everyone who came there, they saw this. Now, the other possibility is that what it means that they haven't had like this is talking about the next pasuk. It could be that it's talking about the way they were going ahead and they were reading from the Torah. That this is something that happened in the time of Yehoshua, but not before. And then they kept Shmini Atzeret afterwards. Interesting. What does it skip? First time I read it, Yom Kippur. What about Yom Kippur? What is it? They celebrated Rosh Hashanah. They read about Sukkot. We make a whole big deal about Sukkot. There's a little PS about Shmini Atzeret. After we have the whole big deal of Sukkot, we then go ahead and say, oh yeah, also they did Shmini Atzeret. Where's Yom Kippur? It's entirely possible that Yom Kippur was a day that they had. And Yom Kippur was no big deal because they always kept Yom Kippur. Now, Lahavdil, I don't know if it's Lahavdil even, we find that today also. If you think about it, up until the last 40, 50 years, Yom Kippur was Yom Kippur. Everybody knew about Yom Kippur. Even if you were anti-religious and you sponsored the Yom Kippur night dance, you knew the night to show your contempt for religion was Yom Kippur because you understood it was considered the holiest of nights. Everyone had Yom Kippur. And so it could very likely be, and this is one of the suggestions in one of the more modern Sfarim that I've came across, that Yom Kippur isn't even an issue. And that's why it isn't mentioned at all. Otherwise, we have that other big question. Why is it the Yom Kippur is missing from this? Must be that Yom Kippur was the same Yom Kippur like they had always had. Yom Kippur, remember, was always centered around the Beit HaMikdash. It was a major event. And so it wasn't something that could possibly not have been kept in the same kind of way. And so it's most likely not ignored, but just not necessary to be included in the text.
Why did it become such a major day?
Which? Yom Kippur was always a major day. Yom Kippur was from the time of the Chumash. Yom Kippur, if you just think about the pomp and circumstance surrounding the Kohen Gadol, okay, Yom Kippur, and the people waiting to see if the Chut HaShani turned white or not, Okay, and whether or not, all of these different kinds of things that happen, all of the pieces that we're waiting, Yom Kippur was always a major day.
Why is it not?
Because it may not be necessary to be mentioned. Here, what they're saying is what is unusual about this year. What's unusual about this year was the ceremony that took place on Rosh Hashanah. Unusual about this year is the way they celebrated Sukkot. And they also had, by the way, while I'm celebrating Sukkot, I'm going to mention Shmini Atzeret. Even, it is still like the 8th day, but it's the way they celebrated and what made it unusual about that celebration. There's a number of different possibilities. Okay, we're going to stop here. Next week, we're going to meet same time, same place. Hopefully, we'll be able to welcome some more people back in person. At that time, we do want to recognize that those online notice that Sid Amder is missing from being online. That's because Sid Amder is here in person. Okay, the coffee is really good. Ilana, I'm saving you coffee for when you come back to Chicago. Make sure you have that cup.
So I
Everybody,
was wondering, are you coming to Israel at the end of the month for the reunion?
I will be in Israel for the reunion. I'm coming in there. I get in Friday morning. I'm leaving Sunday night right afterwards.
Oh
Okay.
my, okay, good. Tov, להתראות. Then we'll meet in person in Yerushalayim.
Wonderful, wonderful. Bye-bye.